Hello everyone, I am Menagese with Reddit Diablo, joined today by Travis Day, designer for Diablo 3, and if you'd introduce yourself to the crowd, you're not a
Leonard
familiar face.
Boyarsky. I'm a writer slash quest designer on Diablo 3.
Good, good, and we're here with some questions for the both of them, and let's get started. So first off, with Diablo 3, what aspect of it are you least happy with right now?
Least happy with interesting. That's a good question because I haven't put any thought into that previously. I mean, we're always trying to improve the game, right? We're a very iterative studio, Blizzard as a whole, and I think we're really happy with a lot of the things in the game and where we are right now. We're always trying to improve. We're always trying to add new things, give players more content, new areas to explore, like the Runes of Szechuan. So I don't know that I would say I'm necessarily unhappy with anything. I think it's just a matter of we want more awesome stuff, so
Sure,
it's
absolutely.
focusing on that.
Sure, absolutely. So, with class balance now with the greater rift system in place, what lessons have been learned with class balance in regard to those greater rifts and seeing how each class stacks up comparative to each other?
I think that a lot of our tuning moving forward keeps a lot in mind in terms of how players perceive, like, what's the best class, what's the worst. Like, oh, Demon Hunters are higher tier than everyone else. Um, all in all, the classes are really, really well balanced relative to each other. I think there's sometimes a tendency to focus on like, yeah, but if we're at 40 and they're 42, clearly we suck and they're the best class in the game. And we try to prop everyone up, so we definitely use the greater rifts as sort of context for who's the most powerful and who's not. But all in all, I think we're in a really good place.
I'm definitely not a hardcore min maxer type player, but from doing testing and various stuff, I'll get into grooves where I'm like, testing out some Crusader stuff or testing out some Demon Hunter, and every time I switch over to a new character, I'm like, oh, this is my favorite, and I play them for a long time, and then I have to switch again, and it's like a little bit of an adjustment period, but they are really. Very comparable. I mean, they obviously all feel different, but they all have, their strengths and weaknesses. And I think it's, these guys done a fantastic job balancing all that out.
Sure, good. So monks we saw in a previous patch were their mantras, where you use them and they did something. But with wizards, it seems like wizards these days they load their active skill bar up with passive abilities like magic weapon, straight 20% damage increase, or prismatic armor. Oh hey, you get more resistances.
I'm familiar.
Is there anything in the works for wizards to get that same kind of treatment that monks have with
Uh,
their mantras?
I think we absolutely, that's something we're aware of, and we talk about it a lot. And I think Wizards are a case where we look at their skills and we're like, yeah, we're not really happy that they're using this many skills. Like some players choose to use just lots of passives on their skill bar. Um, we addressed that a little bit with the Barbarian previously, where we sort of retuned Battle Rage and made it not as mandatory. I think a big part of our focus in trying to get players to experience to utilize other skills would more be in making those skills really powerful, whether it's through sets or items. And I think it's totally fine if some people just want a more normal play cycle where they're only managing a couple buttons. Maybe Wizard's just a really good class for those players.
Okay, sure. We saw ancient items presented yesterday, new thing coming in 212. But they seem just like they're the same items with more numbers. Is there anything else exciting or interesting about them besides just being more numbers?
I think ancient items really what they're meant to accomplish are they're going to fill a role that we really need to fill, which is we want to use our legendary items. We want to be as generous as we can. We want everyone to find really cool items, but that kind of comes at the cost that a lot of people go, well, I've only played for 2 weeks and I have every item I want. We're like, oh no. So what happens if you're a hardcore player who plays for 100 hours like a month, or makes it a full time job and you're a streamer who play more than even I can play? I think it's really important for those people to always have something that they still want. I've said a lot of times the gear you're wearing now shouldn't be the best gear you're ever going to find. There should always be something cooler to chase after or to look for or to get from an awesome Greater Rift drop. And Ancients are really just meant to sort of serve a purpose we need to serve. But I think they're really cool, and I think people are going to be really excited about them.
When they drop, is there going to be anything that distinguishes them from a normal legendary drop, or is it going to be you won't know it's ancient until you identify
The
it.
plan is you shouldn't know it's ancient until you identify it. It's meant to sort of be another one of those reasons you get really excited to ID an item. Like, oh, is this gonna like? Maybe it's not the exact weapon I always like, but come on, maybe it'll be an ancient. So that's the hope.
Sure. And now that we know those are coming with those larger stat numbers, has there been any thought to expanding beyond Torment 6 as far as difficulty goes? Because the common complaint now is, well, just Torment 6, I just roll through Torment 6 now, kind of like how Monster Power 10 evolved to that.
That's a question that actually comes up a lot. The short answer is we don't really have any current discussions about expanding on the tournament system. We feel like there's already a large spectrum of difficulties for players to beat and play through. A lot of that has to do with just how generous we are now with like giving players really awesome items. It makes it a lot easier to beat Torment 6, which is one of our higher difficulties. At the same time, we have introduced Greater Rifts, and we feel like Greater Rifts are really a better place for players to sort of spread their wings and sort of
Sure.
maximize, like see how hard they can beat, how difficult the content can be. And it's also really important for us that players aren't always fighting really hard content. So if you feel like Torment 6 is kind of easy, but then I go do like a Rift level 42, and that's kind of challenging, we think that's a really good flow for the game. It gives players sort of moments to test themselves, and then periods where they can just sort of feel how powerful they've become. And we think that's valuable.
Sure. Okay. We kind of saw the history of Diablo as far as the item goes earlier today, and looking at the stats of them. Secondary stats, apart from single resist, are kind of just boring. Like plus experience, for example, doesn't scale with anything. Is there any thought to maybe expanding on secondary stats to make them just a little more useful?
It's definitely a possibility. Secondary stats were really meant to serve as this sort of they're meant to be nice to haves. We wanted it when we were trying to figure out how we were going to do our items for Reaper of Souls. We had this sort of these long conversations going like, you know what? There's this massive discrepancy in power between some items. A contributing factor is if you get an item with strength, crit, attack speed, crit damage, and I get an item with magic find, thorns, pickup radius, and bonus experience.
Junk.
Well, I may as well not put this item on. So we were really trying to find a way to preserve those stats and still keep interesting things in the game without just getting rid of them because, it's not as good as strength. So we came up with like the split of primary and secondary, mostly so that you could get your power and still have the cool nice dynamics. I think, if anything, our favored solution towards making secondaries more compelling is more like passives like Transcendence or the Witch Doctor, Grave Injustice. We like passives or skills that sort of key into secondary stats.
Sure.
Single school resists are the more universal one, but
Yeah.
for example, the new Demon Hunter set that I showed off to today's panel, where the more discipline you have, the more damage your multi-shot will do, is sort of another way of going like,
Sure.
hey, look, we're going to make this secondary stat max discipline really compelling for some class, for the Demon Hunter.
Sure. Last year when we were here, Thorns was a big discussion. And we saw through Reaper Souls that we have the Invoker set, which does some really cool things with Thorns, but it's almost counterintuitive to the current design of Greater Rifts, where you don't want to be near anything, you don't want anything touching you. Will Thorns just always be that sort of niche build that, you can't really do anything with it, but it's cool out there, or is there anything that where Thorns might be built up a little bit higher?
What do you think, Leonard? What do you think about Thorns?
They're a very highly contested topic amongst our team. There's some people who still think they're really cool, and there's some people who can't stand them. I'm not, like I said, I'm not somebody who gets into the nitty gritty of the system stuff. So I'll leave that to Travis to speak definitively on.
I think with Thorns, it's one that we've talked about a lot. There was a bug we had at one point, actually. I don't know if you remember this, but there was one day where the Crusader passive that gives you Thorns was scaling with the difficulty of the game. It was accidentally scaling off like monster health as like one of the variables in its script. And we were like, holy crap, we have to fix this. And it was like, you have 500,000 Thorns damage if you put this passive on. So people would put on this passive and they'd go into Torment 6. and they were, like using a Thorns build, and it actually was a really interesting sort of experiment that played out totally because of a bug. But I was playing Crusader at the time. Like, I'm gonna go try this out and see how bad this is, see how freaked out we need to be. And I sat there and I'm like, okay, well, yeah, we clearly have to fix this. This is totally not reasonable. At the same time, it sort of made me go, I don't think I want Thorns to ever be a viable playstyle. Mainly because what we saw is, if I had 500,000 Thorns, me hitting a monster did almost nothing, right? The monster had to hit me. So it made me really aware of monster AIs and all these things I've never paid attention to that we don't want players to have to pay attention to. Like, man, fall in, run up to me, scream at me, run away,
Yep.
scream again, run back up to me, and hit me once. And I was like, just punch me! For the love of God, just punch me! So after we sort of saw that passive play out with that bug, we were like, you know what, we don't... We had talked a lot about it previously, and we're like, we just don't want to make this a thing. The only reason the Invoker set is sort of around is we generally have this... We acknowledge there are some people who probably really like the fantasy, and we don't want to take it away, right? Like, if you went out of your way to get a Thorns set, put Thorns on all your gear, and try to make a build work out of it, we don't want to have you log in one day and go, why does my Thorns gear not do Thorns anymore? So it's sort of one of those things where we're like, I'm not really happy with it. We don't want to make it more powerful, and we're kind of content to go, yeah, it's sort of this niche edge case build that maybe some people have fun with, but we're not going to reinforce it.
So to follow along with that, when like Crusader has the Iron Maiden passive, is that just going to stay how it is, or?
I think the fact that also gives you Thorns. Wait, the Iron Maiden passive, we changed that, didn't we? It's like Thorns and bonus armor now?
Oh yeah, you did change that.
I want to say.
Yeah. Got me.
And I want to say we changed that because we didn't want to make your Thorns both things.
Right.
So we're like, well, let's leave the Thorns as kind of a flavor bonus to this passive that's really an armor passive.
Gotcha. Forgot about that.
I could be mistaken, but I think it is. I'd have to check.
So with legendary gems, we know that you pretty much came up with those.
Mm-hmm.
Which legendary gem have you underestimated the most and overestimated the most?
Boon of the Hoarder is the one that we didn't necessarily expect people to love as much as they love it. And I think the one that I was hoping would be more popular is Moratorium. Mostly because we were trying to come up with defensive ideas. And generally people are like, we want more things that make Unity not required.
Right.
And it's like, well, you've got some things. Like, why does no one like it? Okay, fine, we'll make some more that maybe are better. But Boon of the Hoarder was the one where we were like, it was totally this just like, Matthew Berger came in and was like, we're doing the Greed Realm. We need a reward. And I'm like, well, I'm making legendary gems. Maybe we'll make a special one for Greed that gives you lots of gold. And then we're just kind of made that and like, all right, let's do that for Greed. That'll be cool. And then people started getting it, and they would just come into the office like as soon as they would find Boon of the Hoarder and be like, this is the most amazing thing ever. And then I got my own, and I'm like, yeah, this is the most amazing thing ever.
And it makes for a compelling gear option because you think of Gold Wrap and Gold Skin.
Oh, yeah.
Two
absolutely.
items that prior to Reaper just kind of did nothing.
Yeah.
But now you can get a ridiculous amount of toughness now
Absolutely.
with it. And that's
yeah, it's really
interesting.
cool. And, we made those items originally with this idea that, a lot of our items sort of just are generated from this, like, what would be cool? Like, what's a cool fantasy? What does something like Gold Wrap or Gold Skin sound like it would do? What would you expect it to do? And then we just sort of, like, make ideas from there. And those were some where a lot of times when people are like, oh man, this item sucks. I'm like, yeah, it's not very good. But one day, we're going to keep adding stuff. And you're going to come back to that item and go, oh wow, it's really cool.
With Blizzard iteration philosophy at work.
Yeah, which is we've noticed with seeing today's panel and not seeing items that didn't have any legendary effects before, but now have these really cool and interesting things. Going to the non-legendary gems, are you happy with where those are? And mainly in regards to weapons, people always using emeralds and helms. Now everybody using diamonds for cooldown reduction.
I think overall we're pretty happy with how gems work. It's a big part of the reason legendary gems are only allowed to be socketed into jewelry. Is because when we were originally iterating on that design, we said one of the questions Kevin came to me with was like, "So do I not use gems anymore?" And I was like, "Yeah, probably not." So we sort of talked about it, like maybe we won't don't want to totally undermine this entire system that's in our game. Um, but all in all, I think things like the weapon gems does come up a lot. And most of the time, people are right. There's going to be an answer like it's generally going to be an emerald. You're probably using an emerald. Your helmet may or may not be a diamond. Maybe it's a ruby, depending on, or I'm sorry, an amethyst, depending on your playstyle. And if it's a ruby while you're leveling your character or an alt, that's fine. Um, we may continue iterating on weapons and helms over time, but right now we don't have any immediate plans.
Okay. So regarding power curve and as you progress, starting at tournament one, moving up through T6, right now you kind of just have to start out in tournament one, slug it through, and you really don't change your gear much until you completely deck out in your full six piece, and all of a sudden you're up to tournament six, and there's really no middle ground. Is that something that you guys have noticed at all, or is it just kind of how it's supposed to be?
I think that experience is going to be vastly different from player to player. I think for a more hardcore audience and players like myself as well, that's going to be the case. But I do think a lot of people who aren't necessarily like just trying to jump straight to tournament six are just kind of turning it up to maybe find the difficulty where they feel the game is the most fun, or maybe they turn it up a little bit slower because they're playing in hardcore
Right.
and they don't want to jump straight into tournament six. So I think that they serve a purpose.
Sure. Um, Power creep is a term that we see somewhat come up where numbers are just starting to get really big, and we know the WoW team just went through a crunch because numbers were getting too big. Is power creep a concern as of yet in Diablo?
Not for me. I think there's plenty of room. We also, I think for a while, the recent power creep or the recent number squish they did, um, it's mostly because they grow their numbers much more frequently because they have tons of raid content
Right.
tiers and things like that. Um, our game, we have a much more flatter game in the sense that we kind of put all the awesome stuff in right at the start, and where you fall on that power spectrum is largely going to be a matter of how much you play and how lucky you got or what items you got from Kadala. Um, so we aren't going to be inflating power as much. The ancient items are meant to, like I said, the ancient items are very much just these are more powerful, but they're also really rare, and they're really meant to provide a purpose in terms of like farming objectives or goals for people to hunt for.
Right.
But we don't plan to, for example, add a new tier every patch.
Right.
So I think it'll be totally fine as it
Sure.
is.
Okay. Um, we saw two-handers go through kind of a big change in a patch not too long ago, and it seems like that we seem to be flip-flopping between one-handers being good and two-handers being good, and going back and forth. As it stands right now, is you guys happy with how one-handers versus two-handers fall?
I think we're pretty happy with that. I think that the perception of there being any sense of flip flopping is mostly just going to be based on your class, based on what items you find, based on what's best for your spec. I think that it's difficult, and this is just my experience because we ran into this problem WoW all the time when I used to work in that. There's probably a right answer for any given character as
Right.
long as the primary distinguisher is like a slight number variable, right? Like this weapon's DPS is a little higher than this one, so everyone uses this one. But I think they both have their place in the game for sure.
I
Okay.
believe the lore is what makes the difference in this one.
Well, among the Lord plays out. So right now, at the high end, players are kind of forced into picking a single element to play with. And we kind of saw a glimmer of maybe shifting away from that earlier today with the idea of the legendary item with the wither source that rotates around elements. Speaking to that, it's extremely difficult to switch out of single element play. And oftentimes you're punished by it by things like corrupted angels, where you sit there for days on higher grade rifts trying to kill them. Will we maybe see a shift toward a multi-element play style?
There's no intention to shift the game as a whole in that direction. I think the idea that came up today at our Legendary Workshop was really cool. And I personally think that the elemental playstyle is really strong as it is now. I think it helps players feel more like this is my Crusader, right? Because something you hear a lot in Reaper that you didn't hear before is, especially when the game first shipped, I play a Lightning Crusader or I play a Fire Crusader, or right. People were able to really identify with their playstyle,
Right.
because it's represented so strongly as a result of the items. Things, however, where it is a problem are things like the Corrupted Angel. That our monster team recently decided like that ability just has to go. It was cool when the idea was I'd hit them with one element and then I'd switch to another. Our game's not that, it doesn't really work that way anymore, so let's acknowledge that and just get rid of that.
Is that something we'll see with 2-on-2, or is that something that we will probably see later?
That's definitely in a future patch. I'm not sure exactly which one it'll be in.
There'll be a lot of happy people
Yeah.
to hear that.
Oh, I was really happy
to hear
when
that
he
that
told me.
stupid
I was
shield
like,
is going away.
Thank you.
We saw also today kind of this shift of reworking sets to do more things. Like we saw the new Demon Hunter set where you're actually using multi-shot and you're active and you're fighting monsters rather than just dropping turrets everywhere. With Wizards right now with the Firebird set, you're kind of doing the same thing where you're dotting them up with the Firebird's dot and you're running away. Is there going to be any love for that as far as Wizards go?
No, I hate Wizards. So, no, I'm kidding. I think that we always are trying to improve anything that we identify as gameplay that's not fun, or even that just we think is going to create boring or repetitive gameplay. I don't have anything right now off the top of my head for Firebirds, but it's absolutely possible if the consensus is ultimately that this is the best set and it's also the least fun to play. We'll either try to make it more fun to play by adding items that complement it, or maybe altering the set bonus a little so that it captures more enjoyable gameplay. And in the worst case, like in the Marauders set, we're just gonna go, you know what? We're gonna make a set that's better, that's designed better, so that players can gravitate away from the other one without changing it.
Yeah, I think one of the points from the presentation earlier that Travis was talking about on stage was, the philosophy that our sets are going to be sure power oriented, but that power has to come with some aspect of gameplay, not just like passive stuff. Or
Right.
We really want, like, if I'm using this set, I'm going to have a different play style than if I'm using this different set. So stuff where it's very passive, I think we're going to be moving away from that in the
Sure,
future.
absolutely. And I guess I forgot to mention too is that they showed off a new Wizard set at the panel today, where you are very active. You're dropping Time Warp bubbles everywhere, and you're casting your Arcane Orb everywhere, and it's actually a whole lot of fun.
We got time for one more.
Okay, let's go lore one this time.
Great.
We'll look at the ruins of Sescheron. Obviously, you took your inspiration from Diablo II.
Yes.
With that, and Mount Ariat and the Barbarians, might we see more zones along that nature along the way?
Along the nature of
Exploring areas that we know exist within the game, but haven't been explored by us as the player.
I mean, who knows what the future is going to bring, but we're always interested in when we're doing these things to, really mine the history of the world, just to make it more believable, have much more depth. I mean, one of the most interesting things about the whole barbarian civilization is that it was all based around the fact that they were guarding the World Stone in Mount Ariat. To the degree that, the ultimate thing in the barbarian religion is that you need to be buried on the slopes of Mount Ariat, which is impossible now because there is no more Mount Ariat.
Right.
It's been destroyed. Sescheron is almost a metaphor for that. It's like it was destroyed. You never saw it, but you saw the beginnings of it in the Lord of Destruction intro, where Baal is at the gates. And, the fact that their capital has been destroyed and you get to run through that and see the devastation is really a metaphor for the whole barbarian society and their whole, the hole that exists at the middle of their souls, for want of a better term.
Sure, very cool. Well, I'd like to thank Travis and Leonard both for joining us today, and thank you very much for watching.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Awesome.